morning. Good morning, everybody. For those of you who are wondering what I did with Rabbi Goldin, my name is Yossi Goldin. I'm Rabbi Goldin's son. So Rabbi Goldin, I think he might have mentioned last week that he's traveled to the States to visit. He has a few children that are still living there. So I'm privileged to be able to take over for his class for the next few weeks. I think actually, if it's okay, I might even... So I've been privileged at the OU Center many times to take over for my father's class. I see a number of familiar faces, so nice to see everybody again. I think this is such a wonderful program that they're having, that they're combining forces with the Nisayon Shul, and really a wonderful idea. So I'm privileged to be here for the next couple of weeks and to learn with you. I know that my father this year had started to not do Parshat HaShavua, but had been doing more learning, I think it was Sefer Bereshit, kind of starting from the beginning and going along with you through Sefer Bereshit. I didn't want to break that up, because my style's a little bit, I learned a lot from my father, as I'm sure you will see, but I don't want to break up whatever continuity my father had been having in his class. So my father and I decided that I would go back to doing Parshat HaShavua just for these few weeks. So for these few weeks, I hope it's okay. We're going to be taking a little bit of a break from the weekly Bereshit and really learning an idea from Parshat HaShavua. I also apologize. I have a little bit of I had a cold. Baruch Hashem, I'm better, but I do have a little bit of a cough, so I'm using a throat lozenge, and I might have a coughing attack in the middle, but I'm okay. Just the remnants of a bit of a cold. Just to introduce myself, Yossi Goldin. I've been living in Israel for about 17 years. I currently live in Shalavim with my family. And I work for Yeshiva University here in Israel, REITs here in Israel, and as well as World Mizrahi. So at the OU Center, not too far away. That's what I do during the week. And as I said, I'm honored to be here today to learn some Torah with you. What I wanted to do today, as I mentioned, is really pick an idea, an event from this week's Parsha that I think many of us are familiar with, and many of us are familiar with the basic story and have a certain picture of it. And I want to take a look at it again and kind of try to see if there are new messages that we can gain from the story. Those of you who have learned with my father before may know that one of his pet peeves is the concept of how we learn. Very often we learn the stories of the Torah when we're younger, and then those images of the vision that we have from when we were in first grade, second grade, third grade, fourth grade kind of stay with us for many, many years. We don't often take the time to revisit those stories or revisit those events as we're older, and gain a new understanding. And I think one of the classic examples of that is the story of the Manna in the Midbar. The Manna in the Midbar, most of us know what's generally understood to be, was a special gift from God. The Jews were in the desert. God took them into the desert, gave them the Torah. They were there, ended up being there for 40 years. And as we know, and it begins in this week's Parsha, God gives the Manna in response to a request of the people. And I think most of us would associate the manna with being a gift. I mean, what could be bad? Food falling from the sky, as we know, many of us know the medrash that says that the manna tasted whatever you wanted it to taste like. It tasted like anything. It came automatically. You didn't have to prepare it. There was no cooking, there was no cleaning, there was no washing the dishes afterwards. What could be bad? Manna seems to be, and it literally was a gift from heaven. And that's the picture that many of us grow up with, and I think on some level it is true. But if you look closely at the psukim, when HaKadosh Baruch Hu gives the manna, sends the manna to the Jewish people, a bit of a different picture emerges, and a more complex picture emerges. That on the one hand, the manna was a tremendous gift, but it was also much more. And I'd like to start by looking in the sources, in this source number 1 on your source sheet. We'll read through, as I generally like to do, is to read through a number of psukim together. I'll translate them. I didn't bring them in English for you, but I'll translate them as we go through them, just to kind of set the tone for what we're going to be discussing today. This is just to kind of also understand where we're at. This is right after Kriyat Yam Suf, right after the main miracle in this week's Parsha. So Am Yisrael have just been saved, and the Torah tells us in Pasuk Bet, in source number 1, Vayilonu kol adat b'nei Yisrael al Moshe v'al Aharon b'Amidbar. Excuse me. Am Yisrael complained to Moshe and Aaron in the desert. Vayomru aleihem b'nei Yisrael mi yitein mutenu b'yad Hashem be'eretz Mitzrayim b'shiftenu al sir habasar be'achlenu lechem lasova ki hotzeitem otanu el hamidbar hazeh lahamit et kol ha'ka'al hazeh bara'av. They say something astounding. They say to Bnei Yisrael, says to Moshe and Aaron, if only we had died in Egypt. At least in Egypt, we had some good food. We had as much meat as we wanted. We ate lechem lasova. We had the bread that was able to fill us up. And here you just took us to the desert to have us die out of starvation. And again, it's amazing to see, right after Kriyat Yam Suf, not too far along from the slavery that OUisrael experienced, how their image and their vision of what that slavery looked like seems to have shifted a little bit. It's a fascinating, it's a separate discussion, which is how much of that mentality, how much of that slave mentality really stayed with this generation throughout the desert, despite all the miracles that HaKadosh Baruch Hu did. Okay, but let's put that aside for now. The OUisrael complains to Moshe and Aaron, Vayomer Hashem el Moshe, Hineni mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim. So God responds to Moshe and says, I'm going to bring down lechem min hashamayim, bread from the heavens. V'yatza ha'am v'laktu dvar yom biyomo. And then the nation should go and gather it every single day. Lema'an anasenu hayelech b'torati imlo. In order to test them, whether or not they're going to follow the Torah. So there are two interesting things that emerges from this pasuk that I think are very, very important. Anyone have any ideas? What's interesting about the way that HaKadosh Baruch Hu describes the man that's about to fall? Yes.
Test.
Good. Excellent. Okay, good. At the end of the pasuk, God calls it a test. What's the purpose? God doesn't say, I'm going to send down this gift or this miracle. God says, I'm going to send them this food to test them. Okay, this is actually the question of the Bar Benel. The Bar Benel raises this question. He says, I don't understand. Was the man a test or was it a gift? That is, as you see, the name we gave for the SHIUR, the Manna, Nes or Nisayon. Says the Bar Benel, what test is God referring to? And we're going to get to that. That's going to be the focal point of our SHIUR today. We'll get to that in 1 second. There's another interesting thing. I underlined it for you. What does God call it? Lechem min haaretz. Lechem. It doesn't call it man. By the man came later on when the Jewish people said man. What is it? What does God refer to? That's lechem min hashamayim. Lechem min hashamayim. Bread from the sky. Why does God call it bread? Did it fall as bread? What did it look like? Why does it? And I think this is an interesting question that we have to think about. Why does HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically refer to the man as lechem, not as something else, not as basar? Right? They complained about, we're going to see they're going to get basar later, but why specifically lechem? I think that's an important question to think about. Everyone have a suggestion?
Well, in the previous pasuk, it said lechem l'sova.
Okay.
That was what was...
So you're saying, so in response to them, that God was basically, you asked for bread, I'll give you some bread. Okay, even though we don't know if it looked like the bread that they had in Mitzrayim. But okay, but it's going to fall from that. Good. Okay, I think there might be more to it, yes?
Maybe every time Hashem gives us food, we're supposed to attribute it to Hashem.
Okay, good. Excellent, and that's
so you're giving them food, and they could either just say, "Thank heavens we have food," or they could say, attribute it to Hashem.
Okay, and what's the imagery of bread?
The word lechem comes from milchama. Maybe they talked about giving them bread because they were warring with Hashem and complaining.
Interesting. Okay, interesting. Good. So I think you're hitting on something there, which is maybe there's a certain association that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted us to make between what's falling and the bread that we have ourselves. Yes. So I'll get to everyone in a second.
I'm just thinking, we complained,
Mm-hmm.
and then Hashem told us about that. Would He have given us the man if we hadn't?
Also an excellent question.
And how would He have?
Also an excellent question. Well, I want us to put that in the back of our minds as well. Also an excellent question. Was this only in response? And if not, what was God's plan?
How was they going to eat?
What were they supposed to be eating? Okay. Yes.
I mean, bread is associated with the most fundamental
food.
We have.
Excellent.
We have the expression bread is the staff of life.
Good. Okay. So that was just the staple. The staple. The simplest way of referring it. And I think also the fact that they asked for it. I think there is also something here that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is trying to get us to associate with, which we'll get to. But I think it's a very good point. Yes. Did you want to add something? Same thing. It's the staple. It's what you need. Excellent. Okay. So God calls it bread. He calls it a test. And we also have to ask the question as well, which is what exactly was the plan? Was this the initial plan, or was this just in response to the people's question, to the people's request? Yes.
In a way, he's saying two things. One is, I'm going to give you bread to see where you're at with me.
Okay, so you're saying it could be both. It could be it was a response, in which case maybe God wasn't planning it, or it could be, but once He was giving it, He wanted the test. But here's the question, and this is what we have to ask ourselves: what exactly was the test? Meaning, now there are a number of Meforshim. It's really amazing to see the Meforshim have a range of ideas as to what exactly was this test. Meaning, it wasn't just a gift. Clearly, from the Torah we're seeing, God calls it a test. I want to just continue, not here, but I want to go to source number 2 for a second, where the Torah. This is now we're going to see where in Sefer Devarim, where Moshe once again recounts the giving of the man. And he retells us the story again, and see how he describes it. He describes it in very, very similar terms, focusing on a certain affliction, a certain test that the man was meant to see. If we look at source number 2, that this is again Moshe Rabbeinu in Sefer Devarim, before Am Yisrael are going to enter the land, recounting all the things that Hashem did for Am Yisrael. So says HaKadosh Baruch Hu, says Moshe Rabbeinu, Pasuk Bet in source number 2, V'zacharta et kol haderech asher holichecha Hashem Elokecha ze 40 shana bamidbar. You should remember the whole path that God took you in the Midbar for 40 years. Leman anoscha lenasotcha. In order, anoscha literally means to afflict you and to test you. Ladat et asher bilvavcha hatishmor mitzvotav imlo. God brought you to the Midbar. Why did God bring you to the Midbar? In order to afflict you and to test you. Now, he isn't yet talking about the man. He's talking about the entire experience in the desert. But then the Torah continues, or Moshe continues. Vaye'ancha, and he afflicted you. Vayar ivecha. What does vayar ivecha mean? From the word ra'av. He starved you. He starved you. God starved you. Then vayachilcha et haman. And then he gave you the man. So again, is the man part of the affliction, or maybe it was just a response to the affliction? Unclear. Moshe is basically saying God took you to the Midbar. He sent you in the Midbar. He starved you. He afflicted you. And then he gave you the man. Look how Moshe describes it. Asher lo yadata velo yadun avotecha. This was something that you never knew about. You never experienced. Your father never experienced it. Leman hodiacha, in order to let you know. Ki lo al halechem levado yichyeh ha'adam. Ki al motza pi Hashem yichyeh ha'adam. In order to teach you, and this is going to be key. This pasuk is going to be key soon. In order to teach you that a person doesn't live by the bread itself, but rather by God. Okay, so there was a lesson here. There was a message here that says Moshe that HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to give you as you were in the Midbar receiving the man. Continues Moshe Rabbeinu. Look at how he describes this. Simlatcha lo bata me'alecha. Your clothing did not wear out the whole time that you were in the desert. Imagine that. No laundry. Imagine no laundry. 40 years of no cooking, no cleaning, no washing dishes, and no laundry. Right? Okay. No shopping. And you didn't get weary. Your feet didn't get wear out for 40 years. V'yadata. Then says Moshe Rabbeinu. V'yadata im levavecha. You should remember with your heart. Ki ka'asher yiyaser ish et beno Hashem Elokecha miyasreka. Just like a parent sometimes has to afflict or cause a little bit of pain in order to punish. Thank you. To educate a child. That's what Hashem was doing for you in the Midbar. Vishamarta et mitzvot Hashem Elokecha lalechet bidrachav uliroto. You should follow the mitzvot and you should listen to Hashem. You'll see why we're going through all of this, because this is important. Ki Hashem Elokecha miviacha el eretz tova eretz nachalei mayim ayanot utehomot yotzim babika uvahar. Says Moshe Rabbeinu, and this is going to be important for us at the end of today. Moshe, your experience in the Midbar is going to be drastically different than your experience when you enter the land. Because Hashem now is going to take you to a land full of water, full of ayanot tehomot, for beautiful springs, babika uvahar, valleys and mountains. Eretz chita u'seorah, v'gefen te'ina v'rimon, eretz zeit shemen u'devash, and a land that is full of this Shivat Hamidim, very appropriate now as we're about to celebrate Tu B'Shvat. Okay, so says Moshe Rabbeinu, God afflicted you and gave you the man Midbar, and you're going to enter this land where you're going to have to work the land and grow everything yourself. Eretz asher lo b'miskenu tochal ba'lechem, lo techsar kolba, Eretz asher avaneha barzel umeharorea tachtzov nechoshet v'achalta v'savata uve'rachta et Hashem Elokecha al haaretz hatova asher nasan lach. It says this is a land where you're going to be able to work. You're going to have to work to build, to create that lechem. You're going to eat it. You'll become satisfied, and you'll give a bracha to Hashem. Then says Moshe Rabbeinu, what could happen when you enter the land? Hishamer lecha pen tishkach et Hashem Elokecha levilti shmor mitzvotav u'mishpatav v'chukotav asher anochi mitzavcha hayom. Be very careful, because once you enter the land and you begin to build and create and plant yourself and grow yourself, there's a danger. What's that danger going to be? You're going to forget Hashem, and you're going to start to become proud. Pen tochal v'savata ubatim tovim tivneh v'yashafta. You might make these beautiful food, build beautiful houses. Uvikarcha v'tzoncha yibriyun. V'kesef v'zahav yirbelecha. You'll have a lot of food. You'll have a lot of animals. You'll be very successful. V'ram livavecha. We're in pasuk Yudalid. V'shachachta et Hashem Elokecha. Well, I'm afraid what might happen. You're going to become too proud. Kochi v'otzem yadi, as we call it, as you're going to see it soon. You're going to think that I'm the one who did this. I created this land. I built everything. I'm the one who did it. And you're going to end up forgetting who? Hashem who took you out of Mitzrayim. But he didn't just take you out of Mitzrayim, continues Moshe Rabbeinu, and these are the important psukim. Hamolichecha bamidbar. This is the God who took you out of Mitzrayim, who took you to the desert, Hagadol v'hanora, Nachash, Saraf v'akrav, into a desert full of scorpions and snakes. V'tzimaon, and you were thirsty. There was hunger. There was thirst. Asher ein mayim hamotzi lecha mayim mitzorach halamish. There was no water, and he was able to take water and bring you water from anywhere. Hama'achilcha man ba'midbar. This is the same God, says Moshe Rabbeinu, who gave you the man in the midbar. Asher lo yadun avotecha. Why? Lima'an anostcha ulima'an nasotecha. Why did God give you this? Excuse me, this man in order to afflict you and in order to test you. Again, the man was a gift. How is the man afflicting me? And again, how is the man testing me? But then he says, Lehitivcha ba'acharitecha. But the ultimate purpose was for your own good. God did test you, and God did afflict you, but ultimately it was for your own good. And that's what we have to try to understand is, how was the man a test? How was it some kind of affliction? And how was it for their own good? Because the danger is, says Moshe Rabbeinu, and then he ends off saying, when you get to Eretz Yisrael, you might forget all of that, and then what might happen? You're going to say, I'm the one who did this. You should always remember Hashem, because HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the one who gives you the gift. So what Moshe has done here, and you'll forgive me for spending a little bit of time just going through the psukim, but I think it's important to set the tone. What Moshe has described for OUisrael is, and it's very interesting the contrast he makes. Moshe Rabbeinu is contrasting the experience in the Midbar with the experience in Eretz Yisrael. Why does Moshe do that? And we have to think about that. As we're going to be discussing now, the experience of the man. What was the test of the man? I want us to also eventually get back to why is the contrast that Moshe makes with OUisrael's experience or future experience in Eretz Yisrael so important? Why does Moshe specifically remind them of the desert right before they enter the land of Israel? And I think these are lessons for us to think about today. So let's start and try to understand what was the test. What was the test? There is a whole range of miforshim. The first one that many of us are familiar with is Rashi. Rashi says right here on the spot in Parshat Beshalach, source number 3. What was the test? The test was very simple, says Rashi. Lima'an anasenu hayelech b'torasi, says Rashi. Excuse me. Im yishmiru mitzvot hatluyim bo. The test was, the man was given with all sorts of conditions. You had to go only a certain time, only once a day. You weren't allowed to collect more than you were supposed to. There was one day a week you shouldn't go out. What was the one day a week that you weren't supposed to go out? Shabbos. On Shabbos. There were all these laws surrounding the man. So says Rashi, that was the test. The test was, the test was, are they going to leave it over? Are they going to try to save for the next day? I'm sorry, forgive me. Or are they going to go out on Shabbos when they shouldn't? And by the way, were they successful in the test?
No.
Some were and some weren't, right? Some were and some weren't. We know that there definitely were people who went out and against the will. According to Midrash, it was Datan v'Aviram. But they clearly struggled with this test. So this is Rashi's understanding. But what's the problem with Rashi's understanding? Or what's the challenge with Rashi's understanding of the test? Rashi says the test was very simple. The test was, thank you so much. This was a commandment. It was with laws. It had special conditions. And the test was, are they going to follow those conditions? Anyone? And does it bother anyone? What's missing from Rashi's understanding?
The Torah wasn't given.
Did someone tell them?
No, so they were told what to do. They were told what to do. We didn't read that, but it says, don't go out, don't leave it over. They were told. The problem, I think the problem is, and the Ramban raises this. Sorry.
Dependence, uncertainty.
What about dependence, uncertainty? That's another suggestion as to what the test is going to be. What the problem with Rashi's, or the challenge, I should say, speak respectfully, obviously it's Rashi. The challenge, I think, is, and this is actually the Ramban has asked this on Rashi. There's nothing, according to Rashi, the test is nothing inherent about the man itself. The experience of the man wasn't a test. It was more that I gave you something and I wanted to see if you were going to follow my conditions. But it wasn't that the falling of the man, the experience of living, right? According to Rashi, the test was just secondary to the experience itself. And this is the question the Ramban asks. He says, well, according to this, it could have been anything. He could have given them who knows what and just wanted to see if they were going to listen. And but if you look at the way the Torah describes it, It seems to me much more that the man itself was meant to be a test. The falling of the man was meant to be a test. Yes.
Well, it's their only sustenance.
Okay.
So it conditions on whether they're going to have food to eat or not eat. So
Good. Okay.
It's pretty visceral.
Okay, so that might be the test. And that's what some of the Farshim are going to say. We're going to say that that's the test. But that's not what Rashi said. What she said was, maybe it had to do with, and I think some of you were mentioning this or hinting at it before, was the fact that this was their only food. This was their only sustenance. It fell once a day. So, correct, we're going to get to that. But at least according to Rashi, the test part doesn't seem to be fundamental to the idea. But there are other Mefarshim. Let's look, before we get to what you were suggesting, which is really the Ramban, the OURA Chaim HaKadosh, in source number 4, has a very, very interesting perspective. And he suggests that the test of the man was a test of wealth. What do you do when everything is taken care of for you? What do you do when you don't have to clean, you don't have to cook, you don't have to shop, you don't have to do laundry, all of those things that we were talking about before? What do?
You get lazy.
So that's the question. There's two things there's really a double question here. Look at the way the OURA Chaim says it. Source number 4. Leman anasenu ki lechem min hashamayim lo yitztarech shum tikun. With this lechem, they didn't have to do anything. They didn't have to do anything to get it ready. Uvazeh yupnuyim lakol. They were then going to have a ton of time.
That's the test.
So this is according to the OURA Chaim. This is one of the tests. According to the OURA Chaim, the test of the man was, what do you do when you have all this time on your hands? How do you spend that time? Are you going to be learning Torah? Are you going to be using it in order to grow in your relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Excuse me. That's the question. Now, lest we think, and I'm sure many of us can relate to this, but lest we think that this was only a test back then in the Midbar. Today's world, the world we live in, is, as we would say, a world of leisure. The things that we have, the technology that we have that enables us to do the things that we do, means that the test of, again, when I call it the test of wealth, the test of time, the test of leisure, is certainly something that is relevant to us as well. And in fact, I brought for you here a very, very powerful drasha, a sermon that was delivered by Rabbi Dr. Norman Lamb, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, many years ago in the Jewish Center. I'm sorry, yes, you wanted to?
No. I just want to say that I think in OUisrael there's less of more time than in Chutz. True. I think you're right. I think you so the comment was that. And excuse me, you just reminded me, and I have to apologize. Correct. I have to actually apologize. I was meant to say this at the beginning of the SHIUR, and I totally forgot. So just forgive me for interrupting for 1 second. But today's SHIUR and the entire series of SHIURim by my father is sponsored by Dr. and Mrs. Menachem Marcus in memory of their beloved aunts Irma Haas and Hilda Meyer. And the Shema should have an aliyah, and we thank them for the sponsorship. I apologize for that
You were going to repeat
break.
Your comment.
I'm sorry. Yes, I think what you would. Her comment was the comment. So the comment was that in Israel, that leisure time is less than it is in Chutz La'aretz, which could be. I think it depends on the person.
It depends on your circumstances. I personally
Correct.
have a lot more free time.
Correct. It depends on your circumstances.
Everybody has
But I would also I think that's a personal question. Yes, Sonia, did you want to mention something?
It's not so much that Hashem was are then in danger.
Okay, so Sonia's making an interesting point, which you're raising, which is a fundamental question, which we're going to actually see today, which is, well, who was the test for? Was the test for God, or was the test for them? We'll get to that. I want to hold that thought. But let's just stay with this for 1 second. Rabbi Dr. Levin, again, I want to stress this sermon that I brought for you was delivered in 1964. Okay, so that's almost 60 years ago. And imagine the difference between what he's going to talk about and what he talks about in this sermon, which is very prescient to what we have today in terms of the leisure time that we have. I want to read it because I think it's a very, very powerful message for us. And again, seeing the lessons of the Torah being so timely. Says Rabbi Dr. Lamb, he was the rabbi in the Jewish Center in Manhattan for many, many years. And this is a sermon he gave in June, right before the summer. Most people regard vacation as a time for relaxation, fun, and good times, but hardly as a matter for profound thought. Yet the fact remains that as an important aspect of leisure, vacation presents a most pressing problem. A growing literature, both in scholarly periodicals and heavily annotated tomes, testifies to the increasing concern with vacation and leisure. The new scientific, industrial, and economic conditions of our day have made more time available for more people than was ever dreamt by our parents and grandparents. Even more is expected in the coming years, predicted for the near future instances of 4-day, 20-hour week. That never really happened, but although many people work from home, think about it now, post-COVID, how much time do we have, more time do we have in 2024 than was even there in 1964? In addition, early retirement alongside an increasing longevity means the addition of many non-work years to the ordinary lifetime. Here we come then to the major problem. What do we do with all this new time that is available to us? How do we spend it? One need not describe in all its gory details, especially not from the pulpit on Shabbat, what goes on in our resorts, those places sacred to American leisure. Of course, says Rabbi, the sports and relaxation are legitimate, right? No one's saying we shouldn't have some leisure and we shouldn't have a break. But what happens beyond that? Can this kind of activity be said to be the tachlit, the purpose of man's life? Or is it the very negation and antithesis of purposefulness in life? One writer on the leisure problem has correctly stated that modern technology has mastered the art of saving time, but has failed to tell us how to spend our time. Very important key, right? Again, master the art of saving us time, but it doesn't teach us how to spend our time. That is a matter of values, and values are beyond technology. Part of the answer can be derived from the fact that Hebrew has no special term for leisure, meaning old Hebrew. There is in current Hebrew, right? Indeed, the Hebraic mind cannot comprehend the idea. The whole problem of leisure is irrelevant to the Jewish way of thinking. What does spare time mean? How can there be a problem of what to do with time when there is Torah to study? The study of Torah is the most rewarding activity of man. If man were given 10 lifetimes to live, and he worked at the Torah of study incessantly, he would never exhaust it. For us, the answer is the same. The most important activity of man awaits his attention, the study of Torah, each at his own level. I cannot believe that we of this generation who have universal free education and an ever-growing number of university graduates, people who read more and take more courses than ever before, that we should not be able to study the Torah with some kind of intensity. And then the final paragraph. As leisure increases, as many more years free from work are added to the end of a man's or a woman's life, we must reorient our whole philosophy of education as well. There once was a time when a father's major responsibility and obligation was to train his son in a formal, rewarding occupation. Now, however, we must recognize that the next generation and all those following will have more time to spend in leisure than in work. It is therefore becomes a major responsibility for us to spend at least as much energy and effort in training children in the use of their leisure as we do in educating them towards succeeding in their work. Living is at least as important as making a living. Right? Living is at least as important as he says making a living. And as we have pointed out, according to the whole Jewish worldview, there basically is no problem. If we will teach our children Torah, and far more important, teach them by personal example that the study of Torah is a lifelong activity and not reserved only the beginning or the end of one's career, then we will have succeeded in giving our children the fullest education possible and in discharging our obligations as parents to the fullest satisfaction of our consciences before the Almighty God. A very, very prescient and really powerful. He says it much better than I did, which is why I wanted to just read it to you in terms of the value and the importance. And this, according to the OUisrael, was the test of Bnei Yisrael in the Midbar, and that test still remains for us today in a different form, but yet very, very similar to what they had back then. How do we spend our time? I mean, everybody here is spending their morning learning Torah, studying Torah. Really speaks to the priorities that all of you have. But this is a question that we should be constantly asking ourselves, because the technology has given us much more time than we ever had before. And the question becomes, how do we spend that? You don't agree?
I don't think so. Too more information.
Okay. Meaning, no. I think that right. Meaning, it's given us more time. But the question is, have we succeeded in educating ourselves on how to take advantage of that time? And what I think you're saying is, we've then filled that void by creating higher, meaning certain values. But that's more of a value system. Meaning, if there are people who, because they have a car, can get quicker somewhere, and they can use that time for something productive, then great. What I think you're pointing out is technology has not only created more time, but has tried to use that as a way to make more money, and therefore convinced us that we need to fill that time with all sorts of things that we don't really need, like you were saying before, in terms of from a consumer perspective.
I don't think it's just the expectation is you have constantly much more knowledge of all kinds of things going on in the world, and much more.
So I think I think it's a good point, and it's a good question. I think that question then becomes a matter of re-educating ourselves. Is it that they need what she said was that what happens is that it used to be having a newspaper that was enough for you, and you felt good enough just reading whatever newspaper came to your door. Now the expectation is we're going to be educated in so many different ways and filled and have some knowledge coming from so many different sources. And the question would become, I think this is a longer discussion. I think it's a longer discussion, but I think the question becomes: is that really the expectation, or is that the expectation that we create, or that we socially create for ourselves? Meaning, there are people who are able to be content. Just like, for example, I'll give just one quick example, and I'm not here to suggest how people should decide, but we all know that when the war broke out, and I meant to mention this morning as well, and it's an opportunity to also mention that all the learning we're doing should be a Liloy Nishmat, all those who unfortunately, all the soldiers, but certainly those who have perished in the most recent tragedy, and as a refuah for all those who are injured. But the second the war broke out, and since then, there's always the question of how much information should we be consuming, and that's really a question. And the truth is that no one can really define that for us. It's really a self-definition. We have expectations that are created from the outside, that others create for us or that we create for ourselves. But at the same time, part of what the Torah here, maybe the message in 2024, is different than it was back then, which is, every single time you open up your phone to read that other article, do you really need to know that? Or would you be better served being, I know that there are WhatsApp groups that are created specifically for people who only want to get an update once a day, with all the major information that you need. And I know people who are in those groups and who basically say, that's enough for me. And that's enough for me to function. And in fact, that's healthier for me because then I can take advantage of my time. And there are other people who can't do that. And it isn't a question of what's right and what's wrong. But I think that's exactly the question. When you have that time and you have all these new challenges and new ways of how to spend that time are always going to pop up and come up. And the question, in 2024, it's going to look different than it did in 1965 or than it did in the times of the Midbar. But the fundamental question of how you divide that and manage your time, I think, is still there. And that's, okay, we'll take these two questions and then we'll move on. Yes, or comments?
It was more of a comment that when my great uncle went into the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said, what are you up to? And he said, I retired. So the Rebbe said to him, was haste retired? So he started to explain to him the word retired. And the Rebbe said to him, you think I don't know what the word retired means? You better do this, this, and this. Like, right.
There's much more to do. There's always more to do. Yeah, beautiful. Yes?
I just wanted to comment that you keep reading all these things and you are being told what to think.
That's another point. Correct. That's another point as well, which is the impact of it. And again, everyone can decide how that's done, meaning the impact of the additional news that we have and whether that's good for us or not good for us. And I think there can be suggestions made on both sides, and it's a personal decision. But I think the challenge is there, and I think the challenge is the call it a test is still there, just like it was so many years ago. That's the understanding of the OUisrael. Let's move something similar. Yes.
I was just thinking that going out for 18 years, and now.
I think what you're referring to is a moment of transition. There's a moment of transition, and we're going to get to that a little bit later towards the end of the class, which is a guess. What's going to happen, or what's the message Moshe is going to give? There's the message they give in the beginning as they receive the man, and then the message that's going to be at the end before they transition from being in the Midbar to entering Eretz Yisrael, where things are going to change, and we'll get to that. But let's yeah.
So going back to your original question, so we've been talking about. What is the test of the month? Okay, so another idea that I had was, you see, when the Jewish people go to Eretz Yisrael, what do? They become filled with gaiva. They think they're the ones that did everything. They become very self-satisfied. Now, on some level, you want to feel self-satisfied. You want the satisfaction of doing something. But here, that's been taken away from you completely. So
correct.
That's very demoralized.
Good. I want. That's a good point, and I want to hold that thought. I want to highlight that a little bit more when we get to the transition meaning, which is once we're talking about what the test is. But if the test was good and did something good, then why did God change it? Why don't we have man falling? And let's hold that. And I think your point is a very, very good point. But there is an aspect of the man which is dependence, which is you're not doing anything and you're waiting. And we're going to get to that as well. But before we get to that, so we had the OUisrael. The OUisrael suggests that it's basically a gift of time. What do you do at the test of time? What do you do when you have so much time? The Sforno says something similar, but I think it's a little bit different. The Sforno in source number 6, Leman anasenu hayelech b'torati ki sheyeh mitparnes belot sa'ar. What's life going to be when you have everything you need with no pain? You don't have to work for it. You don't, like we said, you don't have to go shopping, no laundry, no dishes in the sink, none of that. What's life going to be? So one aspect was, it could be saying the same thing as the OUisrael, what do you do with all that time? Or it could be, and this is what I would suggest, is he's saying something a little bit different. It's not about time, it's about attitude. What's your attitude going to be when everything is handed to you on a silver platter? What's your attitude going to be? Are you going to appreciate it, or are you not going to appreciate it? So it's also a test of wealth, but it's a different type of test of wealth. It's not the wealth of what do you do with all that time that you now have. It's more a mindset. What's your mindset going to be when you're mitpanes below tsar? Right? If you talk about that, there are some people who their parents and grandparents worked extremely hard, and then all of a sudden the grandchild is given all this wealth, and he didn't work for it, and that's a test. It's a challenging test. That might not be. One could argue is that harder or easier than a test of being poor, but it certainly is a test, and it's something that I think the Sforno is hinting to, which is what's your attitude going? Are you going to appreciate it? Are you going to bite the hand that feeds you? And by the way, the jury's out, right? OUisrael throughout the Midbar, on the one hand, received this gift of the man, and yet they constantly complain about it. So, did they pass that test? But that's the Sforno and the Orach Chaim. The Ramban, in source number 7 and source number 8, we won't read it fully inside, but we'll explain it a little bit outside. The Ramban has a totally different view, and it's very similar to what some of you were hinting at before. He says the test wasn't an issue of wealth. It wasn't an issue of what do you do with the time, or what happens when everything is easy. Rather, the test was, are you going to follow God when you don't know where your next food is going to come from? It's the challenge of basically bitachon, trust in HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What's going to happen when you're in the desert? We're in the desert. Imagine not in your refrigerator. You don't know. And your kid said, Mom, what are we going to eat tomorrow? Eat tomorrow? Who's thinking about tomorrow? Well, what do you mean? What if there's no food? So every single day for 40 years, they were walking in the desert. And they had no idea, is that food going to come tomorrow? That, says the Ramban, was the test. We'll read a little bit inside here, source number 7. Ki Nisayon hu lahem shelo haya bi'adam mazon. They didn't have food with them. Now again, we had a little bit of food. We know that they brought some of the food. We know they brought the matzah, they brought some, but eventually that ran out. And what happens when they get to a point where there's no longer any food? V'lo yiru lahem eitzah ba'midbar. They had nothing else in the desert. Rak haman. All there was the man. Shelo yadu mitchile. They weren't familiar with it. They'd never seen this man before. It wasn't. Think about it. It was almost like they had no frame of reference. Like they say to Moshe, "Where's the food going to come? Oh, the man's going to fall. The man. What's man? What do you mean? It's going to fall from the sky." They had never seen it before. They had no idea what it was. That it was a totally new concept. So would they still trust in God? V'lo shamu me'avotechem. They had never heard about it from their fathers. V'yored lehem dvar yom biyamo. It would fall down every single day. V'yarivu elav. We talked about how God said he excuse me, he starved them. What does that mean? He starved them. He didn't starve them. But the nature of the way that the man was that every single morning you woke up hungry, and you didn't yet, and the man, and you hoped that the man had fallen that day. So there was a starving in the sense that you didn't have like in your back pocket some snacks to pull out in case you were hungry. Ve'im kol zeh, says the Ramban, shamu lalechet acharei Hashem lo makam lechem. With all of that, Yisrael still followed God into the desert and followed them and was confident to be able to be there and trust HaKadosh Baruch Hu that he would give them the food. And the Ramban basically, by the way, says this was deliberate. He points out that there could have been other ways that God could have taken them into Israel. He could have taken them into cities. What would there be in cities? Food to buy, food to work for, water. HaKadosh Baruch Hu specifically took them in the Midbar in order to challenge them with this test of are they going to follow HaKadosh Baruch Hu? And the imagery that the Ramban uses, I think, is very much the imagery that many of us are familiar with. If you look at source number 9 for a minute, source number 9 is the famous pasuk that HaKadosh Baruch Hu describes in Sefer Yirmiyahu. The context is totally different. In Yirmiyahu, the Navi is talking about how he's going to be bringing upon OUisrael certain horrible punishments for things they did. But because of certain actions they had taken many, many years ago, the punishments won't be as bad as they're supposed to be. Says Yirmiyahu, Vayihi devar Hashem elai lemor. Hashem says to me, Haloch v'karata ba'aznei Yerushalayim lemor. I want you to tell the following words to the people of Yerushalayim. Ko amar Hashem. So says Hashem, Zacharti lach chesed ne'urayich. I remember your kindness from when you were young. What kindness from when they were young? When they were a young nation. What was the kindness that God gave to, that Hashem gave to, that Yisrael gave to God? Ahavat kilulotayich lechtech acharai bamidbar be'eretz lo zerua. Right? The famous line that we followed God into the desert, into a land that was not sown. And then continues the Navi, Kodesh Yisrael Hashem Reshit Tevuata Kol Uchlav Yeshamu Ra'ah Tavo Alehem Nuhum Hashem. And the Radak here notes that basically what the Navi is basically saying is, even though I'm about to bring a punishment to you because you deserve a punishment, the punishment is going to be mitigated because of the schut of what you did by following God into the midbar. Look at the Radak here. It's the second part of source number 9. Even though I'm going to bring you a punishment for things that you did wrong, I'm not going to destroy you. I'm also going to punish those who did bad. Why? Because I remembered the things that you had done for me by following me in the midbar. So here we have, the test was, are they going to follow Amis? Are they going to follow God into the midbar? And at least on some level, in that way, they certainly passed that test. Yes?
We lost some cattle somewhere.
Where's all the cattle that OUisrael had? It's a great question.
They took it out of Nisayon. I mean, that was part of the negotiation.
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure. I'm assuming that, first of all, we have to remember, we're talking about 600,000 men, which means we're probably talking about 2 million people, so there's a lot of people. I don't know how much, it could be that only lasted a certain amount, but I don't know.
They also brought it into Eretz Yisrael.
So that I don't remember. I mean, I know that they brought certain korbanot. They had korbanot. They definitely had certain korbanot that they had brought with the Mishkan.
And then they negotiated. They wanted to stay on the.
Oh, you're right. That's a good point. Correct. When Bnei Gad and Bnei Ruvain, they said we have a lot of cattle. That's a good point. It's an excellent question. So you're raising a very good question, which is what about all that cattle? I mean, obviously, in retrospect, they didn't need to use it because God brought them on. But the question we could ask is, why were they complaining if they had all this cattle with them? It's a very good question. I'm not sure. Okay, what I want to just highlight. So we had, according to the Ramban, what happened here was the test was a test of faith, of emunah. But the Ramban says something more. And this highlights something that Sonia mentioned earlier, which is, wait a second, whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu tests, when God tested OUisrael here, was it because God didn't know what they were going to do? And this is a question the Ramban asks in the very, very beginning of Sefer Bereshit. What's the purpose of a test? When God tests somebody, says the Ramban, it's never for God. Why? Because God knows what we're going to do, right? This raises a separate question, which is, if God knows what we're going to do we have free will? And that's a totally separate question. But under the assumption, which we believe, that God knows what we're going to do, the test isn't for God. Who's the test for? Us. Because we might not recognize our potential. We might not recognize it. And even if we do, the phrase the Ramban uses is, Lehotzi min hakoach el hapoal. There might be certain potential that we have within us, and we don't even know we're capable of. And only when we're put under that test are we able to then bring that to fruition. So here too, says the Ramban, what happened here was two things. When OUisrael followed God into the midbar, number one, it enabled God to reward them later on, right, for following him in the midbar. But it also made them aware of the latent potential that they had. It made them aware of their ability, of the emunah that they had to follow God and to follow him and believe in him, even though they didn't know where that food was going to come from, or they didn't know necessarily that every single day that food was going to come. So we've seen so far two main approaches to what this test was. Approach number one was a test of wealth. Either a test of wealth from time, having time on your hands, or an attitude. What do you do when everything is easy and good for you? Number two, according to the Ramban, it was a test of faith. It was, are they going to follow God in the desert and stick with him, even though they've never seen this man before and they have no idea where that man is going to come from? The third approach is the approach of the Rashbam. And the Rashbam builds off of the Ramban. He agrees that the main issue we're talking about here was one of faith and trust in God. But says the Rashbam, it wasn't as much a test as much as it was a training. What do we mean? Okay? The word Nisayon usually is understood to mean, let's take the modern understanding, can mean a test. I'm testing somebody. But Nisayon in modern Hebrew can also mean experience. Okay. Says the Rashbam, the man falling in the midbar, when God says it was linasotcha, it wasn't necessarily, as we originally interpreted it, mean to test you. It was to train you. In what way was this training OUisrael? Look at source number 11. Says the Rashbam in source number 11, Mitoch shebechol yom vayom einehem tluyot lemizonotehem elai. Because every day OUisrael needed to turn to God and think about God and remember that it came from him, mitoch kach ya'aminu bi v'yelchu b'torati. They'll then remember me, believe in me, and follow my ways. As it says back then. What does it mean, Vayancha vayarivecha? Why was God doing this in an afflictive way? It wasn't to afflict us, it was to train us. Sometimes when you train, it can be hard, right? Anyone who does any physical training, it's hard. It's not the easiest thing in the world, but it builds something up. The purpose of the man was to build within Am Yisrael a resilience and an understanding where my sustenance comes from. 40 years the nation needed to learn and see and recognize that the food comes from God in order to build that within them so that, as we're going to see soon, when they enter Eretz Yisrael, hopefully they'll be able to maintain that even when the man stops. And that's the Rashbam's approach. And in fact, by the way, we see this highlighted in a relatively well-known Gemara, a very, very important Gemara. The Gemara in source number 12. Excuse me. Sha'alu Talmidav et Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. The students of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai asked him the following question. Mipnei ma lo yarad lahem li Yisrael man pam achat bashana. Why did the man have to fall every single day? Let it fall once a year. They'll have a little storage area where they'll keep their pile of man. Well, once a week, once a month. Why did it have to be every single day? So he gave them the following mashal. Amar lahem. Emshol lachem mashal. I'll bring you the following parable. Lema davar domeh. What's this similar to? Lemelech basar vadam sheyesh lo ben echad. You have a king, and he has only one son. I'm sure parents, you'll probably relate to this. Those of you who have may remember your experiences with your children. Okay, your kid comes in, Mom, Dad, I want some money. Okay, let's say your son is meant to have an allowance. Okay, for and every week you give him $5. Okay, or you can give him once a month $20. What's the difference?
He's going to spend the 20.
Well, how often he'll spend it, but in terms of your relationship with your child, when are you going to see your child more? If you give him 5, 4, right, once a week, you'll see him more often. The same thing happened here. Pasak lo mizonotav pam achat b'shana, v'lo yabakpil pnei aviv ela pam achat b'shana. If the king gave his son his food on an annual basis once a year, how often did he see his son? Once a year. Okay, Amar and he got smart. Says Rosh Bar Yochai. Amar v'pazach mizonotav kol yom. He made a new rule. You know what? From now on, you need to come every morning to my kingdom, and I'll give you your food. V'ayamapil pnei aviv kol yom. And what happened? All of a sudden, the father sees his son every single day. The relationship is entirely different. Af Yisrael, the same thing with Am Yisrael. Mi sheyesh lo arba v'chamisha banim hayadoeg v'omer shema lo yered man lemachar. If someone had 4, if you were, not just for yourself, you had a family, you had 4 children, 5 children, every single night you went to sleep saying, I really hope that there's going to be food for my family tomorrow. Which means that every single night you went to sleep davening to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You had a relationship with him on a daily basis. And so what the man did, according to the Rashbam and according to this Gemara, is it created a sense of dependence and created an automatic relationship on a daily basis with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that, says the Rashbam, was the Nisayon. It wasn't a test as much as it was a training ground for Am Yisrael as they went through the Midbar. And I brought for you here in source number 13. We're not going to see it inside now just because of time. Rav Hirsch explains how beautifully this is exactly what it was. He refers to the Midbar as the phrase he uses is a school. It was like a school. It was a school for 40 years where Am Yisrael were trained to remember everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They were trained to remind themselves that everything we have comes from Hashem, and He is the source of everything that we have. Exactly what the Rashbam says it, the Rav Hirsch has a very unique way of saying it. But now let's get back. Once we've understood this, so what we've understood is we've seen, just to summarize, we've seen 3 different reasons. We asked the question, why is it that or in what way was the Manna test? We saw 3 main approaches. Approach number 1 was it was a test of wealth, either with time or attitude. Number 2, it was a test of trusting HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Are you going to trust in God? Are you going to remain steadfast in your belief in God in the desert where you're not going to have food every single day? And the third approach was it wasn't as much of a test as much as it was a training process. It was a growth process where Am Yisrael were meant to grow in their relationship with Hashem on a daily basis as they prepared to enter Eretz Yisrael. So now let's go back to Sefer Devarim. Moshe Rabbeinu is standing in front of Am Yisrael right before they enter the land of Israel. And Moshe is saying, now things are about to change. Things are going to change. God gave you everything, to test you and afflict you in the Midbar. He gave you everything you wanted, and now you're going to enter the land. What's going to happen when they enter the land? What does Moshe say? What's going to happen when that connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a daily basis ends? They're going to start to say, Kochi v'otzim yodi. They're going to start to say, wait a second, I built this house. I planted this yard. I made this bread. You're going to start to forget. So here's my question. And this gets to what some of you had talked about before. So then why change it? If the purpose of the man was to remind us that everything comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, why does God not just give us the man right now? And that way we'll always have that relationship with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why doesn't man fall right now? Why in Eretz Yisrael do they now have to work for it?
Because the purpose of creation is to make it zira b'tachtonim and to elevate the physical. And if you continue just living in the midbar, you're not fulfilling the.
Excellent. So the simple understanding, which I think many of you are probably going to say, which is that that's not life, right? That's fairy tale. But real life is when you build and create. Real life is when we work with God. We partner with God in creating the land and building. That's exactly what Eretz Yisrael is meant to be. That's why when a person works in agriculture, you'll build a land. That itself is a mitzvah. Because what God wants from us is not to just sit there and accept handouts, but to partner with Him in the establishment and the creation of everything that we have. However...
And even then, you still have to say that it's from Hashem.
Okay, good. However, I would argue that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in a very ingenious way, try to find that balance. Now let's get back for a second. What does the Torah call the man? Lechem min hashamayim. Why is it called lechem min hashamayim? So many of you pointed out that's just the basic sustenance. I think what it was trying to do was to connect the man with what we're going to create when we're here. To remind us that you think that man was just something special? That was food. And there's different ways to get food. Sometimes you get lechem min hashamayim, and sometimes you get lechem min haaretz. And ultimately, where are both of them from? Hashem. Lest we think, that was just in the midbar. That was just midbar, this miracle life that we had. What we got was just supernatural. It tasted like anything we wanted. No, says the Torah, it's lechem in hashamayim. Because lechem and lechem, everything you have, even what you have to partner with HaKadosh Baruch Hu in creating, is ultimately from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But to take it even a step further, when Moshe describes the land that Hashem is going to bring us to, he says something fascinating. He says, by the way, I'm going to bring you to a land, but that land is not like Mitzrayim. In Mitzrayim, in Egypt, where do they get their irrigation from? The Nile. Which means it's automatic. It's there all the time. Where did God bring us to? Where did Moshe bring us to? Eretz Yisrael. What's unique about the land of Israel? What do we need? Geshem. Right? We're right now experiencing it right now. So HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm going to bring you into the land. You're going to need to work for it, but I'm going to bring you into a land where even though you're going to have to work for it, you're still going to need me. And you're still going to need to be reminded of me. Right? Those of us who I happen to be somebody that I personally, I'm somewhat affected by the weather, and I love sunny. So when I was in America, I was always upset when it rained. And now I moved to Israel, I'm not allowed to be upset when it rains because, it's raining. Right? Gishmei bracha. And from my kindergarten, my 2-year-olds know that when it rains, it's Gishmei bracha, and we thank Hashem for it. It's something that's just a part of I happen to live in Tel Aviv near a kibbutz, and there's a guy in the kibbutz, because they still have agriculture, they measure the amount of rain in the season. They still count it. They count the amount of rain. It's something that we still is real here. So that connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even though we're making it ourselves, HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, I'm going to bring you to a land where you still need to feel that partnership. And our job is to make sure to remember that and remind ourselves of that every single day. Exactly. 100%. I want to just end. I'd like to just end with one other source to close this thought. Because what we've really been highlighting today was this question of how do we deal with the issue of what we would call hishtadlut and bitachon. How do you find that balance between believing in Kadosh Baruch Hu, knowing that everything comes from Kadosh Baruch Hu, but also knowing that we now live in a land where we need to put in our effort. We're not living in the midbar, in the miracle of the midbar. So there's a Gemara, or it's actually a Medrash, in source number 14, that describes 3 different approaches that rabbis had to how they would find this proper balance. The pasuk says by the man, Dvar Yom B'Yomo, it used to come every single day. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Shelo Yilaket Adam Min Hayom L'Machar. Says Rabbi Eliezer, the lesson of the man is a person should never save for tomorrow. You should only be working every single day what you need today. Okay? That's the lesson of the man. V'chein Hayar Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mi sheyesh lo ma sheyochal hayom, v'yomar ma ani yochal machar, Says Rabbi Eliezer, anyone who has food for today and is thinking about tomorrow, he's what's called a mechusar emunah. He's lacking in his emunah. Okay, obviously a very, very high level. That's Rabbi Eliezer. Says Rabbi Yoshua, Rabbi Yoshua Omer, sheyilaket adam min hayom limachar, V'chein me'erev Shabbos l'Shabbos. You're allowed to plan from one day to the next. 1 day in advance you're allowed to do. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Shana Adam shtei halachot b'shacharit v'shtei halachot b'arvit v'asam lacha kol hayom ma'aleh alav ki'ilu kiyem kol haTorah kula. Why? If a person learns a little bit of halacha in the morning, a little bit at night, and the rest of the day he's working because he's planning for tomorrow, then that's considered to be a good thing. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Lo nitna haTorah. Sorry, did I skip something here? Sorry. Lidrosh elaloch lehaman haketzad. Haya adam yoshev v'shoneh ve'en yodeh me'ayin yachal v'yishteh u'me'ayin yitlabesh v'yitkaseh halo nitna Torah lidrosh elaloch lehaman. Shniya. Sorry. Sorry. I'm sorry, I apologize. Says Rabbi Shimon, so if you don't say where is it going to come from, but you say me'ayin yochal v'yishteh, where am I going to get my food from? Where am I going to get my clothes from? The Torah was only given to the Ochlei Haman. So according to this, we have 3 basic approaches from this midrash. What is the proper approach to hishtadlut and to bitachon? Rabbi Eliezer says, only worry about today. Rabbi Yoshua says, from Erev Shabbos to Shabbos, you can plan a little bit. If you work a little bit and you work and you learn a bit, that's okay. Rabbi Shimon says, the Torah is only given to the Ochlei Haman, people who sit and learn and don't think about anything else. Those are the 3rd approach. I'm sorry, there were 3 approaches. There's a little bit of a problem with the wording there that we have to just fix it. Rabbi Shimon, basically he's saying, so these are 3 different approaches to how we're supposed to approach. Are we supposed to work? Are we supposed to say it's all going to come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu? Because after all, that is the message of the Manna. All the message of the Manna is everything's from Hashem. At the same time, we know we're supposed to work. How do you find that balance? And as we know, in today's society, in today's world, there's different hashkafot about this. There are people who say, no, I need to build my emunah, and I'm not going to put too much focus on my hishtadlut. The other side would be, and many of us I think are more on that side, is no, we're supposed to be responsible. We're supposed to do whatever we can, but also remember that it comes from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And how a person finds that proper balance between their bitachon and their hishtadlut, the emunah and the hishtadlut, is a personal thing. But what's clear is we need both. It's clear that in today's world we need to work. We need to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves, but we also need to remember that ultimately, and that's the message of the man, we also need to remember that it all came from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Thank you all. Wishing you all a wonderful, wonderful week, and Bezrat Hashem, we'll see you next week. Thank you. Baruch Hashem.